The clock ticked past 9:30 p.m. as I drove down a dimly lit country road, the kind that stretched endlessly with no sign of life. I was on my way to my friend's house for dinner, a casual Friday night plan. The world outside was a blur of darkness, save for the occasional flash of headlights from distant cars. The GPS on my phone announced, "Turn right in 200 meters." And as I glanced at the screen, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I laughed at myself. "Get it together," I muttered. It was probably just the solitude playing tricks on my mind. But then, it happened. I heard a sharp, metallic clunk from the back of my car. The sound jolted me upright, and I glanced in the rearview mirror. To my horror, the trunk of my car had popped open, on its own. "What the?" I murmured, my pulse quickening. I slowed the car, keeping one eye on the empty road ahead. The last thing I needed was for my bags to spill out in the middle of nowhere. As I pulled over and stepped out into the crisp night air, an eerie silence enveloped me. There were no crickets chirping, no rustling of leaves, just an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. I approached the trunk cautiously. It was wide open, but nothing seemed to be missing. "Faulty latch," I reasoned, slamming it shut. But as I turned to get back into the car, I froze. A woman stood in the middle of the road, barely visible under the weak glow of my taillights. She was barefoot, her long dark hair tangled and obscuring her face. She wore a pale dress that looked damp, as if she had just walked out of a river. "Ma'am?" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. I took a hesitant step toward her, but before I could say another word, she tilted her head slightly, almost as if acknowledging me, and then she began walking straight toward my car. Panic surged through me. I jumped back into the driver's seat, locking the doors in a frenzy. The woman was now just a few feet away. Her face was all wrong. Her hollow eyes seemed to sink into darkness, and her lips were curled into a grotesque smile. I floored the gas pedal. The car sped forward, and as I looked back in the rearview mirror, she was gone. I exhaled shakily, trying to steady my racing heart. But just as I turned my eyes back to the road, she was there again, directly in front of the car. I slammed the brakes, bracing for impact, except nothing happened. The car screeched to a halt, but there was no thud, no sign of her anywhere. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel. My breath fogged the windshield as I scanned the empty road. She was gone. I convinced myself it was stress, exhaustion, anything but what it truly felt like. I kept driving, determined to put as much distance between me and that road as possible. When I finally reached my friend's house, I stumbled out of the car, shaken but relieved to see the warm glow of her porch light. She greeted me at the door, her smile fading as she saw my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she joked nervously. I forced a laugh and brushed it off, but as we sat down for dinner, my phone buzzed. A notification. Trunk open. Chills ran down my spine. I hadn't touched the car since arriving. When I went outside to check, my heart nearly stopped. The trunk was wide open again, and inside, lying neatly on the floor, was a single waterlogged shoe. Driving for Uber wasn't glamorous, but it got me through the last few years. New Year's Eve was the biggest payday of the year. Drunk partygoers and generous tips. By midnight, my app pinged with a new ride request. It was from a part of town I normally avoided, an industrial zone on the outskirts of the city. But the payout was irresistible. When I arrived, the street was desolate, bathed in flickering orange light from a failing lamppost. A man in a black coat emerged from the shadows. He was tall, with a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. "You Daniel?" I asked. "Yes," he said curtly and slid into the back seat. As we drove, he sat in complete silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Heading to a New Year's party?" I asked, forcing a smile. He didn't answer at first, then murmured, "Something like that." I laughed nervously. "Well, I hope it's worth the trip." Then he leaned forward. Have you ever thought about how easy it would be to kill someone while they're driving? My stomach churned and my grip tightened on the wheel. Excuse me? He smiled faintly, leaning back into the shadows. Forget it. Just a thought. My mind raced. I considered pulling over, but the destination was just 10 minutes away. Maybe he was just some weirdo trying to make conversation. But as the silence dragged on, I couldn't help but glance at him in the rearview mirror. That's when I noticed his hands, blood on his knuckles, smeared like he'd tried to wipe it off. But I told myself he could have just been in a fight, maybe defending himself. I convinced myself to stay calm and finish the ride. We reached the destination, a rundown house on the edge of a wooded area. As I stopped the car, he tossed a folded piece of paper onto the passenger seat. "Read it," he said. I hesitated, then unfolded it. Written in messy handwriting was a note. He's not who you think he is. Don't trust him. What the hell is this? I stammered. That's your warning, he said. His voice had shifted. It was lighter now, almost amused. I whipped around to look at him, but the back seat was empty. Then, the car doors locked, and I heard his voice coming from the back seat speakers. I was sent to kill you, he said, calm as ever. But plans change. Panic surged through me as I tried to unlock the doors. Who sent you? I screamed. You already know the answer to that, he replied. She paid well, but I like to play my own games. Suddenly, the screen on my phone lit up. It wasn't the Uber app. It was a live video feed. My wife's face appeared, tear-streaked, gagged, and tied to a chair. She thought I'd finish you first, he said, laughing. But I like to let my clients watch. Consider this your New Year's gift. I screamed at him, demanding answers, but the voice cut off. The screen went black. The car finally unlocked and I stumbled out trembling, my head spinning. I called the police, desperate to save my wife. When they tracked her location, it was too late. They found her tied to the chair, but she wasn't alone. The killer was sitting beside her, smiling for the cameras, as if waiting for me to show up. And the final twist? On the table between them was another note in her handwriting. If you're reading this, it means he got to you first. I'm sorry. I had no choice. To this day, I don't know if she hired him or if she was just another pawn in his game. But every time I get in my car, I wonder, was that the last ride I'll ever take? It started as a joke. Another one of those apps promising to change your life. Connect with your deepest fears, it claimed. Find the people who share your darkest dreams. I rolled my eyes. Still, I downloaded it. Everyone loves a good mystery, right? The app's interface was simple, just a list of interests, each more bizarre than the last. Do you dream of the ocean? Does the color red make you uncomfortable? Do you feel like someone's always watching you? I filled it out, a few questions for fun. I didn't think much of it. Who would? Then the message popped up. We've found someone who shares your darkest fear. Ready to meet them? Curious, I clicked. Yes. The app then asked for access to my location. I hesitated, but it seemed harmless enough. It was just an app after all. The next message hit me like a punch in the gut. Go to the park on Pine Street. We've arranged your meeting. I froze. Pine Street. That was my childhood park, the place I used to run and play with my sister, before she disappeared. She'd vanished when we were kids, without a trace, and no one ever found out what happened. The mystery was my personal nightmare, the place where it all began. With shaking hands, I grabbed my jacket. This couldn't be real. It had to be a coincidence, or maybe some sick prank. But my heart raced as I opened the door, my feet leading me to Pine Street without thinking. As I walked, the darkness around me seemed to grow heavier, Thicker. The streetlights buzzed faintly in the cold night air. I reached the park and felt an odd chill. The app pinged again. Look for the bench, the one with the missing slat. I walked toward the familiar bench. How could I forget? The missing slat was where my sister and I had carved our names as kids. And now it was the bench where I was supposed to meet. Who? I sat down, anxiety rising in my chest. My phone buzzed with another message. They're waiting for you. Suddenly the screen went black. The next moment, a new notification appeared. Do you remember? I blinked. Do I remember? It hit me. I remembered the night my sister disappeared, the night she was last seen, sitting right here. But that wasn't the worst part. I didn't just remember it. I was reliving it. The phone screen flickered, showing a blurry image of a figure standing in front of the bench. I squinted. That figure looked like me. Panic clawed at my chest. I wasn't alone. The air turned cold, and I felt a presence behind me. I whirled around, but no one was there.